Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has inaugurated the Kartarpur corridor to facilitate Sikh pilgrims from India and around the world. Thousands of Sikhs from different parts of the world, including India, attended the inauguration ceremony.
Addressing the ceremony in eastern Narowal district, Khan said the border's opening is a historic event for millions of Sikhs. He congratulated the Sikh community on their spiritual leader Baba Guru Nanak's 550th birthday. He said the philosophy of Guru Nanak revolves around humanity.
All the messengers of Allah preached about two things, justice and humanity. Teaching of Guru Nanak Dev Ji also pegs around these two things. All the saints talk about unifying the people. They don't talk about dividing the masses.
Prime Minister Khan asked the Indian government to lift curfew in occupied Kashmir. He said the Kashmiri conflict is not the issue of land, rather it's a matter of humanity.
Kashmiris are being treated like animals. Their right to self-determination granted by the UN has been snatched. Peace cannot be established in such situation. If Indian Prime Minister Modi is listening to me, I want to tell him justice is precursor to peace.
Former Indian cricketer turned politician Najjot Singh Sidhu thanked Prime Minister Khan for taking the initiative of the Kartarpur corridor.
On the other hand, the Indian Supreme Court in its Ayodhya case verdict has handed the disputed Babri mosque land to the Hindus. In a unanimous decision, the top court said the Indian government will form a trust for the construction of a temple. More in this report.
The long-awaited verdict of disputed Babri Mosque has been announced. Hindu fanatics destroyed Babri Mosque in Ayodhya, Uttar Pradesh in 1992, starting riots which claimed 2,000 mostly Muslims' lives. In today's ruling, a 5-judge bench ordered the Indian government to form the scheme and rules for working of the trust. The bench ruled the trust will oversee the construction of Hindu temple at the disputed land.
The disputed area has been given to the Hindu side. The Supreme Court has told the central government to set up a trust under Section 6 and 7 of Ayodhya Acquisition Act and to make full arrangements for the management.
The top court has ordered to give 5-acre land to Muslims at an alternative place in Ayodhya for mosque. Expressing his reservation, Indian Sunni Waqf Board advocate Zafar Yab Jilani said he and his client are not satisfied with the verdict.
We will go through it fully, then we will decide what future course of action will be ours. That is, detailed comments cannot be made just now. But we can say that the judgment is, there are several contradictions in the judgment, and there are some incorrect findings also.
The Indian top court has announced the verdict on the same day when Pakistan opened Kartarpur corridor for Sikh pilgrims.
Refuting Hindutva propaganda, two Indian archaeologists have said there was never a Hindu temple under Babri Mosque in Ayodhya. In their article, Supriya Verma and Jaya Menon refuted Archaeological Survey of India's 2003 report claiming a temple under the mosque. In an interview, Verma said ASI excavation showed there was already a preconceived idea about the existence of the temple. The archaeologist said underneath the Babri Mosque, there are actually older mosques. Verma said ASI presented 3 evidences. One is this western wall, second are 50-pillar bases, and third are architectural fragments. Rejecting the proofs, Verma said western wall is a feature of a mosque, while pillars are just pieces of broken pieces with mud in them. Talking about third proof, she said out of 400 artifacts, only 12 are most important, and none of these were excavated. The archaeologist said these 12 pieces were recovered from the debris lying above the lime floor of the mosque. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Qureshi has called Ayodhya verdict insensitive for Indian Muslims. In its verdict, the Indian Supreme Court handed the land of Babri Mosque to Hindus, caving in Hindutva pressure. In a statement, Qureshi said India chose to announce the verdict on this joyous day of Sikhs at opening of Kartarpur corridor. The Foreign Minister said ruling party Bharatiya Janata Party's Hindutva ideology is the pillar behind its political rise. Qureshi said Gandhi's India has been buried under the Hindutva ideology of RSS. The US has branded Iran's treatment of an International Atomic Energy Agency inspector as unwarranted intimidation. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington supports the IAEA's monitoring activities in Iran. Pompeo said the US was alarmed by Tehran's lack of cooperation as IAEA should conduct its work unimpeded. Tehran said authorities found contamination in the lavatory and on inspector's handbag during a house search. Iran said IAEA officials were present for all the searches. The UN nuclear body has not publicly commented on the incident with the inspector so far. Earlier, Iran cancelled a UN inspector's accreditation after an alarm was set off at the Natanz atomic facility last week. North Korea says the US is running out of time to advance deadlocked bilateral talks. Pyongyang urged Washington to reciprocate while dismissing the US sanctions as an unacceptable insult. Head of North American Department at North Korea's Foreign Ministry, John Chol-so, said Pyongyang was ready to reopen dialogue. Speaking at Moscow Non-Proliferation Conference, Joe said Pyongyang was interested in tangible results.
We've given the United States quite a lot of time and we're waiting for an answer before the end of the year, some kind of a result. We hope that everything will develop in a positive way. But I must say that the window of opportunity closes every day.
White House is yet to respond to the latest comments from North Korea. Now moving on, the UN says the death of former Egyptian President Mohamed Mursi looks like an arbitrary killing at the hands of the state. The UN Human Rights Panel said the former president was held in brutal conditions that contributed to his death. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said Egypt's first democratically elected president was placed in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. He said Mursi was forced to sleep on a concrete floor with only one or two blankets for protection. The UN said authorities denied any help to Mursi, who was suffering from health problems. The United Nations has warned thousands of other detainees are also at the severe risk due to the ongoing brutal conditions in prisons. Mursi died on June the 17th this year while being trialed for charges which were allegedly politically motivated. Turkey's Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu says Ankara will start extraditing captured ISIS terrorists to their home countries from Monday. Speaking at a ceremony in Ankara, he said Turkey has told European countries that their citizens will be sent back. Turkey has nearly 1,200 foreign members of ISIS in custody and has captured 287 during its recent operation in northern Syria. Ankara has repeatedly criticized Western countries for refusing to repatriate their citizens who joined ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Some of the countries have stripped the citizenship of ISIS members. However, it remains unclear whether Turkey will be able to repatriate those who have lost their citizenship. Thousands of high school students across Lebanon skipped classes for a third day in a row to carry on the country's anti-graft movement. They are demanding a complete revamp of the political system. The country has been gripped by massive protests since 17th of October when the government proposed a social media tax. Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri stepped down last month to calm the protesters, but it's too little too late. The World Bank has also urged Lebanon to form a new government quickly. Now moving on to Ukraine, where the government forces and the Russian-backed separatists have restarted withdrawal from the western Donbass region. Ukraine says the troop pullback in the village of the Patrisk is part of confidence-building measures under the Minsk agreement. Kiev said it has now fulfilled all necessary conditions for a peace summit with Russia to take place. Earlier this week, the sides deferred the ongoing troop pullback in war-torn eastern Ukraine. The United Nations top court said it has jurisdiction to hear a lawsuit filed by Ukraine against Russia for supporting pro-Russian separatists. Presiding Judge Abdulkavi Yusuf said conditions had been met for the case to be heard in full. In a hearing at the International Court of Justice in June, Moscow asked judges to dismiss the suit. Moscow said Kiev was using it as a pretext for a ruling on the legality of Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Russian forces seized Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula in 2014, shortly after a pro-Russian president was toppled in a popular uprising. Moscow then organized a referendum and annexed the territory. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said North Macedonia and Albania have made good efforts to secure EU membership. Leyen was speaking after talking with Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin. In her comments, Merkel said the two countries continue to have a prospect of membership. France's President Emmanuel Macron has vetoed further expansion of the EU at a recent Brussels summit. The decision effectively dashed the two countries' hopes of making rapid progress on accession. Brazil's former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been freed from prison after his release was ordered by a judge. Da Silva served a year and a half behind bars on charges of corruption. The former president pumped his fist in victory as he exited the federal police headquarters in the southern city of Curitiba. He was quickly surrounded by hundreds of supporters and members of his Workers' Party who waved red flags. In an address, Da Silva vowed to keep fighting for poor people and denounced the economic policies of the current president, Jair Bolsonaro.
I have a desire to prove that this country can be much better when it has a government that doesn't lie as much on Twitter as Bolsonaro does.
Da Silva has called for a rally today at the Metal Workers Union on the outskirts of Sao Paulo to start his national tour. Now moving on, 5 police officers have been killed in an ambush near Oaxaca state in southern Mexico. Authorities say 2 others have been injured in the attack during a regular patrol. In a tweet, Oaxaca Governor Alejandro Murat condemned the incident and ordered an investigation. The drug violence has multiplied in recent years in Oaxaca. Earlier, the mayor of San Jose, Estenasia Grande, and a state official were killed in an armed attack. In Chile, protesters have clashed with the police again on the streets of Santiago. The peaceful rally turned violent after demonstrators set fire to a university building and ransacked a church. Fire crews said they are facing trouble in reaching the blaze because of a large number of demonstrators blocking the way. The protest sparked over a hike in metro fares unraveled into violent riots, looting and arson. Protesters are demanding an end to social injustices and economic inequality. Prosecutors are investigating more than 800 allegations of abuse, including rape and torture by security forces during demonstrations. UN Human Rights and Amnesty International have sent a fact-finding mission to Chile to interview alleged victims. Welcome back. In Australia, 2 people have been killed in bushfires sweeping near Glen Innes north of Sydney. Authorities say 30 others have been injured and 7 people are still missing in the deadly fires. They said high winds and hot weather triggered the bushfires in the countryside of New South Wales. Executive Director of Operations Rob Rogers said more than 1,000 firefighters and 70 helicopters are battling the blazes. The fires have destroyed more than 100 homes and thousands of residents are trapped in their homes. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says the fires are expected to expand and cause more damage.
These fires have already claimed 2 lives that have been confirmed, and as the Premier said, we're expecting worse news as the day unfolds. There have been hundreds of properties that have been destroyed, homes that have been destroyed, and as we get access to further areas that have been cut off, we're expecting worse news again.
The Prime Minister has declared emergency in New South Wales and Queensland, advising people to take precautionary measures. And moving on to Britain, where a woman has died and dozens of homes have been evacuated after floods swept large swathes of Midlands and country's northern parts. Police said the woman's body was found near the town of Darley-Dale of Derbyshire. Torrential downpours have caused major transport disruption, including closure of a number of train lines in England. Yorkshire and Midlands are worst affected areas, with some residents rescued by boat. Rescue officials have issued more than 100 flood warnings. Dozens of people are trapped in shopping centre in Sheffield City. South Yorkshire Rescue Service has received nearly 1,200 emergency calls in 24 hours. A Met Office spokesman said this wet weather may linger over the Midlands. Germany is celebrating reunification and democracy on the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Berliners and visitors from around the world have gathered to celebrate the Festival of Freedom peacefully and exuberantly. More in this report.
Large projections with historical pictures of the Berlin Wall are displayed across the city. The celebrations of reunification anniversary feature concerts, lectures, contemporary witness talks, and poetry slams.
We artists painted these pictures between the end of January and September about what happened then, and how people are really interested in seeing these pictures.
On 9th November 1989, euphoric Germans clambered on the top of the wall, smashing it with hammers to break it up. Families, friends, and neighbors separated into West and East Berlin were finally reunited after 28 years. But before that, 138 people trying to escape to the West lost their lives.
Then my mother came. She also came over the yard. She was a bit nervous. She was already older than 50 and she didn't recognize me, thank God. That would have been dramatic.
Since then, the site has become an export hit. Not only segments of the broken wall have been sent off around the world as state gifts, but also new technologies like virtual reality headset have allowed people to experience the menace of the toppling of the hated wall.
A tunnel under the Berlin Wall.
The most interesting part for me was to see how deep the tunnel. I had never imagined that the tunnel was so narrow and long.
Today, Berlin is known as a place of freedom, opportunity, and individuality. For its people, the fall of the wall 3 decades ago was the best day of their lives.
In Australia, caretakers at a veterinary centre are looking after koala bears burned in a wildfire that recently swept through New South Wales. Hundreds of koalas were lost in the blazes near the town of Port Macquarie in the state's north. This report has more on how the survivors are faring.
Nurses at Port Macquarie Koala Hospital feed the burnt animals with formula and leaves in the intensive care unit. The patients, Paul and Anwin, have bandaged paws, burnt noses, and singed fur.
It's tough. They look terrible, the poor little things. They're black, obviously. Some of them are in a lot of pain. They're the ones that we're really hopeful for, of course, are the ones that are taking food.
2/3 of the koala population at Lake Indus Nature Reserve died a week ago after a lightning strike ignited a fire. Another fire sparked in the reserve on Thursday, threatening the remaining koalas. Koala Conservation President Sue Ashton says 350 of the reserve's 600 koalas died in the bushfire.
Some of the temperatures have gone up to 800 degrees, and at that heat, the koalas will just simply burn and disintegrate.
Caretakers hope the survivors in the reserve can cope until help arrives.
Chinese online retail titan Alibaba is reportedly planning to raise up to $15 billion in a Hong Kong initial public offering. The public offering would take place at a pivotal moment for Hong Kong's future, as the city has been rocked by months of protests. The company will prior seek approval from Hong Kong's listing committee next week. If realized, the transaction would be the world's biggest ever cross-border secondary listing. Alibaba currently holds the crown for the world's biggest initial public offering for its $25 billion float in New York in 2014. There was no immediate comment from the firm. China's producer prices fell the most in more than 3 years in October as the manufacturing sector weakened on the declining demand. The National Bureau of Statistics says the producer price index fell 1.6% year on year, the steepest decline since July 2016. Economists say a weakened consumer demand reflects the impact of China's trade war with the US. In contrast, China's consumer prices rose by a higher than expected 3.8% in October. The consumer price index has been driven up by a meat shortage. But core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, was recorded at a modest 1.5%. Many economists say China's rising consumer price index may become a concern for policymakers looking to stimulate demand. Chinese ambassador to Pakistan, Yao Jing, says Beijing is going to establish 19 factories in Gwadar to create jobs for Balochistan youth. Talking to media, Ying said China seeks to contribute to overall development of Balochistan's mining, agriculture and water sectors. Ying said the Chinese consulate is easing the visa procedure for the businessman community. He said CPAC will change economic fortune of not only Balochistan but also Afghanistan and Central Asia, with all projects going through Pakistan. The envoy said 50 vocational centers are being established for enhancing skills of young generation of the province. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.